Second part. Right. Good morning. We're going to get this running. Again, I'm Michael Miles, Deputy Director of the Cannabis Compliance Board. Here with me is Chief Cronkite and Chief Gilbert. We're going to be running through a reg workshop that consists of regs 1 through 5. And Thursday, we'll be doing another workshop and dealing with regs 6 through 15. We're just going to start off with public comment. Again, this is a public comment that doesn't have anything to do with the reg changes. We're going to have a separate public comment for each individual reg as we go down the line. So any public comments down here in Las Vegas?
Deputy Director Miles out. I'm going to read the joining information.
Please do.
To provide public comment via telephone, call 669-444-9171. Enter webinar ID 872-9757-2720, followed by passcode 862560.
We'll give you a few minutes. Let me know if there's any public comment online. All right. Doesn't look like it. Let's move forward into agenda item number 2. Again, we're going to start off with regulation 1 on this. Again, it's just regulation 1 through 5. There's a few changes we made based on the statutory changes outside of SB 157. Obviously, we're handling that one separately. I'm going to go through, talk about Reg 1. For this one, Chief Cronkite is going to just give a little summary for each one. And then we're going to open it up for public comments and public comment on these changes and also any other changes you would like to see made to regulation 1 and each reg as we go down. So we'll start off with item 2A1, Chief Cronkite.
Eric Cronkite for the record. Regulation 1 is a body of definitions. The definition of the term derived was stricken from the regulation as it now currently exists in statute. NCCR 1.110 imminent health hazards was defined based on changes made to the statutes this last legislative session, basically taking what's currently in guidance and putting it into the regulations. 1.115 label was removed from the definitions and regulation because it currently exists in statutes. And 1.135 packaging defined was removed because it currently exists in statute.
All right. Does anybody have any public comments they'd like to make on the changes we made to regulation 1 or any changes you would like to see made to regulation 1? All right. Any public comment online?
There is no one online to provide comment.
All right, we'll close up regulation 1. Regulation 2, we have no specific changes, but we still can hold open if anybody wants to make any comments on regulation 2 or wants to see any changes made to regulation 2. Please come up now. We'll open it up for public comment. All right, we have nothing for regulation 2. Again, anybody online, Sarah?
There's no one online.
Okay. We'll close down regulation 2 and we'll open up to regulation 3. Again, regulation 3 is Cannabis Advisory Commission, organization and administration. Again, we don't have any changes based on statute to make in there, but again, we're opening it up. If anybody has any ideas or anybody wants to see any changes made to regulation 3. If you have a comment, please step forward now. All right, we have no comment on regulation 3 here in Vegas. Again, anything online, Sarah?
Nothing online.
All right, let's move to regulation 4. 4 is, again, Regulation 4 is Cannabis Advisory Commission, organization and administration. Again, we don't have any changes based on statute to make in there, but again, we're opening it up. If anybody has any ideas or anybody wants to see any changes made to regulation 3. If you have a comment, please step forward now. All right, we have no comment on regulation 3 here in Vegas. Again, anything online, Sarah?
Nothing online.
All right, let's move to regulation 5. Again, Regulation 4 is our disciplinary and other proceedings before the board. A lot of these changes are just a few words, adding hearing officer and adding employed by the board throughout the various categories, as the new procedure is disciplinary hearings will be held in front of the administrative law judge, and they will issue the order. After that, you can appeal to the board if you wish. But again, all the category violations is just adding that a hearing officer employed by the board or a hearing officer employed by the board throughout the various category violations. And we'll just jump right into the two major changes in Reg 4, which was it 4.065, 4.067, and 4.105. Those would be Chief Cronkite.
Cronkite for the record, NCCR 4.065, imminent health hazard. Again, just takes information that was in guidance document and the procedures for other public health agencies and puts them into regulation for self-closures or required board-issued closures for operating during an imminent health hazard and how to become operational. NCCR 4.067 is the procedures for an administrative hold order. This was included into the statutes during last legislative session. This outlines the procedures. NCCR 4.105 just changes the procedures for suspension of operations as outlined in the changes that were made to statute during the last legislative session.
And we also adjusted 4.095. Again, adding in the hearing officer, and adding extension abilities for the early case conference. Again, 4.110 discovery, we just deleted a chunk of it based on statutory changes. We removed 4.135 altogether, as there no longer be an adjudication in front of the board for disciplinary matters. It'll be in front of the ALJ, and then you can appeal to the board at that point. Again, 4.130 subpoenas, again, just adding in hearing officer instead of executive assistant to issue the subpoenas. And we also adjusted 4.145, the adoption, amendment, or a repeal of regulations. All right, does anybody have any comment on Regulation 4? Please come forward.
Good morning.
Morning.
Lake Martin today on behalf of the Nevada Cannabis Association. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments. I'm going to let Amanda address the imminent health hazards because she has a good sort of example of where that comes up and how the changes are a little bit confusing. And I think that maybe just some clarification could really help, and we're happy to suggest language. I'll touch on section 4.067, administrative hold orders. So we outlined this in much more detail in our letter, but the main point is ensuring that the regulation aligns with Senate Bill 168, that a hold may be issued only when a product both fails a statutory or regulatory requirement and constitutes a substantial hazard to public health. The regulation shifts that standard in a variety of ways, but most notably it adds a catch-all category, allowing holds for any circumstance when a board agent deems a possible threat, which again departs from the statutory intent. So again, we go through in our letter in much more detail and point out where we have concerns about some of the language. And then third, on 4.105, that section has to do with procedures for suspension of operations. And my recommendation or ask would be that instead of referring to a section of the Assembly bill, to just spell out those circumstances in the NCCRs, so that it's much, the licensees don't have to track down outside legislative documents.
Kara Cronkite, while we would love to do that, legislation doesn't like redundancies. And so LCB typically kicks it back if we put everything in statute into the regs, which is why those definitions are being removed. We can look into it and see if they'll allow it. But just for your awareness, that might not be something we're able to do.
Got it. Thank you.
Amanda Connor with the law firm of Connor & Connor for the record. I will get to 4.065 in just a moment, but I think it's important for clarification. My understanding is these proposed regs assume implementation of the regs that were considered at the November 20th meeting, correct? And if so, the November 20th meeting had a regulation in NCCR 1 that defines day. And it defines day different than the proposed regulation in 4.012. Slightly different, but different. And I think that could cause some confusion for licensees. I would recommend that we have a consistent definition of day across the board. If we want to repeat it in 4.012, fine, but it should be consistent definition. That's the first thing. Second, with regards to 4.065, I think the confusion arises from the addition of the new subsection 3, which states that if operations are discontinued under section 1, or otherwise according to the law, that they shall obtain approval from a board agent before resuming operations. So as an example, under subsection 1, they are to discontinue operations if there's an interruption of electrical services. There's no time limit specified in that. So there could be a brief power outage due to a windstorm, for instance, that lasts 3 minutes. That would not actually be arguably an imminent health hazard, but it would, under these regulations, trigger that. If that happened on a Friday night when CCB staff are no longer working, that store or cultivation could not resume operations until Monday morning when CCB staff approved them resuming operations. I don't believe that was the intent, but that is what it says, right? And so I think some clarification there would be very helpful. The Dispensary Association suggested perhaps data-based time for interruptions of electrical services or lack of water, potable water or hot water or something like that, that would make it a little cleaner. I don't think it's fair to licensees to require them to remain closed because of a brief power outage until the staff is back working. And I also don't think it's fair to staff to ask them to work after hours to respond to such things. So that's with regards to imminent health hazards. I would just reiterate what Lake said with regards to 4.067. I think that many of the selected language changes is outside the statutory authority. The statute defined the reason to be substantial hazard to public health, and different definitions and uses are used throughout this proposed regulation, such as possible threat or those types of things. It should be consistent with the statutory language. The last thing I would note is that this is, and I get that the regulation may not cover everything required, but SB 168 did require a notice, and the regulation doesn't contemplate that notice going out.
Respond.
No, I think clarification is never a bad thing. I agree with 4.065 that it does come off that way. This was not meant to include like self-closures. If you notice it yourself, it's more if the CCB agent discovers it and closes your facility, then you would need our approval to reopen. That was the intention. And again, I understand your consideration with the power outage.
I think before you just want them to give us notice, if it goes out, just let us know that it was out and what they did to get it back up and what they did to resume operations. That's all.
Exactly. And we can clarify that in the regulation. I think that's fair. And then I'll review 4.067 with the deputy attorneys general and see if there's any revisions that are required based on your comments.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments on regulation 4? Sarah, any comments online?
There's no online comment.
All right, let's move on to regulation 5. And Chief Gilbert will be handling regulation 5.
Steve Gilbert for the record. The proposed amendments to Regulation 5 combine the application requirements outlined in NRS 678B.240 for medical and 678B.280 for adult use licensing. Section 5.025 and 5.030 are deleted as they pertain to the one-for-one applications and are no longer needed because all licenses are now dual license. Section 5.037 is updated to reference regulations 5.038 instead of 5.037. Section 5.038 is a new section titled Submission of Applications for Cannabis Establishment License other than a cannabis consumption lounge license. 5.038 is language that is carried over from 5.037 and amended to allow for any type of cannabis establishment application other than a cannabis consumption lounge. This section now includes an adult use establishment application process, whereas before there was just an application process for medical establishment license. Section 5.039 is updating the criteria and weighting of merit for evaluation of license application for a cannabis establishment license other than a cannabis consumption lounge license. This proposed language provides for an adult use license application process. 5.039A updates the amount required to meet the minimum liquid asset requirement from $200,000 to $250,000. 5.039E, the likely impact of the proposed medical cannabis establishment on the community in which the proposed cannabis location is to be located, adds language for medical applications submitted pursuant to NCCR 5.037. 5.039F, the adequacy of the size of the proposed cannabis establishment to serve the needs of the persons who are authorized to engage in the medical use of cannabis, adds language for medical applications submitted pursuant to NCCR 5.037. This language is for cultivation and production only. 5.039G, the adequacy of the size of the proposed cannabis establishment to serve the needs of the persons who are authorized to engage in the medical use of cannabis, adds language for medical applications submitted pursuant to NCCR 5.037. This criteria is for cannabis sales facility only. 5.039I, whether the applicant or the persons who are proposed to be owners, officers, or board members of the proposed cannabis establishment or has had an ownership interest of 5% or more, or board or officer position in a cannabis establishment that has admitted to a violation or been adjudicated to have violated a Category 1 violation, this proposed language adds and adjusts the points for category violations. 5.039J, whether the owners, officers, or board members of the proposed adult use cannabis establishment have direct experience with the operation of cannabis establishments in the state and have demonstrated a record of operating such an establishment in compliance with the laws and regulations of the state for an adequate period of time to demonstrate success. This proposed language adds application points related to direct experience. 5.039K, the experience of key personnel that the applicant intends to employ in operating the type of adult use cannabis establishment for which the applicant seeks a license. The proposed language adds applications points related to key personnel. 5.039L, for applications submitted pursuant to NCCR or NRS 678B 220, subsection 3, the likely impact of the proposed medical cannabis establishment on the community in which it is proposed to be located. If the Board of County Commissioners issues a letter of approval for the applicant shall be awarded 5 points. This was added to accommodate applications submitted pursuant to NCCR 5.037. 5.039.5. Cannabis establishments prospective and conditional licenses is a new section, but is the same as the prospective license requirements for consumption lounges without the social equity requirements. This outlines what is required to be submitted during the suitability investigation phase in order for an applicant to proceed to the conditional phase if found suitable by the board.
And since this came up multiple times during the session, I just want to point out that under 5.039 1A, where we raised the minimum requirement from 200,000 to 250,000, we're doing that because it was combined medical adult use licenses, and the medical requires 250,000. And again, I also want to point out, stress 1,000 times over, that 250,000 does not come to us in any way, shape, or form. That is the licensee's money to build their license with. Because we're just making sure they have a certain amount of funds put aside before we give them a conditional license. That's all that means. Again, do we have any comments on Regulation 5?
Again, Lake Martin, Nevada Cannabis Association. And we stress this in more detail in our letter, but we just don't see the statutory authority for the use of a random number generator as contemplated in 5.0395. It is permitted only for consumption lounges when the local government limits the number of available licenses. But for other license types, the statute requires merit-based criteria and specific weighting, as is outlined in 5.03. 9, the section right before. But lottery would bypass that process and conflict with NRS 678B 250 and NRS 678B 280. Thank you.
And that's not a comment because, again, it's come up a dozen times before. We obviously disagree with that position. There's nothing that prevents a random number generator from being used. We do consider merit-based along with it. It's just if the point ends up in a tie, at that point, we use a random number generator to decide who gets the license.
Yeah, and because applications would be eliminated before they're being able to be evaluated for merit, that's why we believe it violates the statute, because they all have to be weighted.
Amanda Connor with the law firm of Connor & Connor. I reiterate Lake's comments with the Nevada Cannabis Association. We discussed this, there were proposed regulations before considering a random number generator for all license types. There was a lot of debate about that. The legislature had the opportunity. There was a bill proposing using a random number generator for all license types. They rejected that.
No, it was a bill was submitted and never made it to the legislature. It was pulled before it was actually considered by anybody. It was never considered by the legislature.
But they had the opportunity, and they have not changed that licensing provision. They incorporated lottery for lounges and very explicitly made it only for lounges. The other portions are merit-based. And as Lake said, I think it's different if you the process laid out does not consider the merit before. It's you go through the lottery and then you do the conditional license phase, which considers the merit. That's not a merit-based application. That's going into a random number generator, which is what the lounges did. So again, I think that this statute is pretty clear that they're different between lounges and all other license types. I don't think there is any need for a random number generator.
The merit is considered through the points-based in the application. That's why we have a huge list of things that came directly out of statute that we are considering and giving points based on the merit of that situation. Again, if your points end up in a tie, that's the only time you're going to end up in a random number generator situation. Suitability investigation is something that goes beyond, but that's something completely separate from the licensing. It's done without, done after you're, or as you're being considered for the conditional license. But it's a separate process. You do the merit based on the application points. If it's a tie, you do a random number generator. If you make it past that point, then you do the suitability analysis. So that's, I would love to come up with another way of doing it. It's been proven throughout the country, merit-based doesn't work. It didn't work here either. Had multi-million-dollar litigation over it. It happened everywhere throughout the country. We had an expert report that says you should never do a merit-based because again, it's just going to result in lawsuits no matter almost however you choose to do it. We're open to other options, but I've yet to hear anybody come up with other options that would work. It's either merit-based or some do straight random number generator, which we're not doing. We're trying to combine the merit-based and a random number generator if it's necessary. But
And I understand the litigation concern. I would say that is to be addressed through the legislature. Have the statute changed so it's not a merit-based application if that's the position, right? But the statute requires merit-based.
we want to continue using merit-based. That's the problem. That's why we created the application process considering merit-based requirements listed in the statutes. So I understand that we're never going to agree on this.
We're going to tweet.
Just exactly.
Regulations.
Get it every time.
But yeah, I think that's the concern is.
Yeah, and I think if it's that scenario that you described, again, which we still don't believe is authorized by the statute, I don't know that subsection 1 specifically says it in that exact way that you just did.
Which,
Yeah, I did not read the regulations proposed to describe the situation you said, which is we go through all the merit-based and only in the event of a tie do those two go into a lottery to break the tie.
Right, because in this scenario, it's just if there are more licenses than if there are more applicants than licenses, then you go to a random number
yeah,
generator.
that one we would do, but it's also based on tying up the points, isn't that?
Yeah.
Thanks for pointing that out. I'll go through and see if we can make that a little more straightforward. But that is how it's meant to be. It's going to look at the points based on those merit-based evaluations. If the points end up in a tie, then we're going to have a drawing, and then we'll go into suitability after that.
So
That's how it's meant to
you
be.
have-
I'll take a look at it again.
Hypothetically, you have 10 open spots. You're gonna score all 15 applications. 1 through 9 are fine, they get in, don't go into the lottery because they scored high enough. If there's a tie at 10 and 11, you would only put 10 and 11 in the lottery?
Correct.
Because I
I
do
don't
not
think this
believe
says that.
that's how
Yeah.
the regulations read.
Does everybody else, we can,
I'll have to look at it.
all right, yeah, take a look at it. We'll see if we can clarify that.
Because the way I read it was if there's only 10 spots and 15 apply, all 15 go in the
Correct.
lottery.
Oh, yeah, no, that's not how it's meant. So we'll take a look at it again and clarify.
Yeah.
Thanks for pointing that out. Any other comments on Regulation 5? Forgot one.
Since you had opened it up, I again wanted to reiterate what we had in our letter that in the passage of Senate Bill 41, it was discussed that the Department of Taxation would have oversight over the enforcement of taxes, and therefore NCCR 5.1001H should be removed because that's the section that the CCB can deny a license for renewal based on taxes. So again, to allow for due process to take place under taxation, that section will need to be removed.
Agree wholeheartedly. And we're just waiting until they get the regs implemented, and then we will absolutely remove it. Even though it's in our regs, once they pass those regulations to move forward, so tax can handle it, we will no longer be using that portion of the reg. It will be one line stricken at that point until we can get it removed from the regs.
For confirming.
Any other comments on Reg 5? Sarah, any comments online?
There are no online comments.
Let's move on to the public comment that didn't have anything to do with these regs. Anybody has any public comment for anything they want to discuss? Please come forward. We have no public comments down here. Sarah, any public comments online?
There's no online comment.
All right, thank you very much. And we'll move on to item number 4 and we will adjourn. And again, we'll be back here on Thursday for working on regs 6 through 15.